She felt the hand before she saw the face, and in that split second, her entire world shattered and rebuilt itself. One touch, one impossible moment, one soldier who wasn't supposed to be there. You think you know what longing feels like until you've lived it for 8 months straight. You think you understand absence until you're making coffee for someone who exists only in photographs and fading memories. You think you've mastered the art of waiting until every single day becomes a battle between hope and the terrifying possibility that homecoming is just a word people say to make deployment easier to swallow. But here's what nobody tells you about military families, about the women and men who stand behind the uniform folded on the chair and the boots by the door. We become experts at living in two worlds simultaneously. The one where we function and smile and pretend we're fine, and the one where every car door, every footstep, every unexpected sound makes our hearts stop because maybe, just maybe, this is the moment duty finally gives back what it took. This isn't a story about parades or flags on tables or the sanitized version of sacrifice they show you in movies. This is about the morning she woke up believing he was still overseas, still counting down days that had no end date, still writing letters to a man who might not come back. This is about the routine of absence that becomes its own kind of mission, how you learn to carry grief and hope in the same breath, how honor and love become both your anchor and your enemy. What happened that Thursday changed everything, but not in the way you think. Because the real miracle wasn't just his return, it was that after months of deployment, after all the ways sacrifice tries to break what it can't understand, they still remembered how their pieces fit together. And if you've ever waited for someone, if you've ever known what it means to love someone whose duty calls them away from you, then you already know this story isn't just theirs, it's yours, too. The coffee maker sputtered to life at 6:15 a.m., just like it had for the past 8 months. She poured 2 cups, one for her, one for the ghost of routine that refused to die. The second mug sat there on the counter, steam rising into nothing, a daily offering to absence itself. It wasn't denial, not really. It was the only way she knew how to keep him close when deployment stretched months into what felt like years. The uniform folded on the chair in the bedroom had stopped smelling like him weeks ago, but she couldn't bring herself to wash it, couldn't erase that last physical trace of the morning he'd left. Every evening, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a pen hovering over blank paper, writing letters she'd never send because she didn't know where to send them. Communications are limited, they'd told her during the briefing, those careful military words that meant, don't expect much. So she wrote anyway, about the neighbor's dog that wouldn't stop barking, about how the grocery store rearranged the aisles, and she got lost looking for his favorite cereal, about the way the bed felt too big and too cold all at once. His boots by the door stood like silent sentries, laces still tied the way he'd left them, gathering dust that she refused to wipe away because cleaning them felt like admitting he might not come back to fill them. The TV stayed on the news channel more than it should have, her eyes scanning ticker tapes and world maps, trying to decode where honor and sacrifice had taken him this time. She'd catch herself doing math, calculating time zones, wondering if, when she was having breakfast, he was watching a sunset somewhere dangerous she couldn't pronounce. Duty and love had always been intertwined in their marriage, but deployment taught her they could also be opposing forces, pulling her heart in directions that left her suspended between pride and longing. The flag on the table, the one they'd given her at the send-off ceremony, remained perfectly folded in its triangular case, a symbol she both cherished and resented because it reminded her that mission always came before homecoming, and sometimes there was no homecoming at all. Something shifted in the air the week before it happened, though she couldn't name it at first, just a feeling that crawled under her skin like static before a storm. The phone rang at odd hours, but when she answered, there was only breathing, and then a click, as if someone had called just to make sure she was still there. His buddy from the unit, Marcus, who usually checked in every Sunday like clockwork, suddenly went radio silent. No texts, no calls, nothing. She told herself it meant nothing. That deployment did strange things to communication. That orders changed and missions got extended, and maybe everyone was just busy. But her gut knew better, had always known better when it came to the subtle language of military life. A packager arrived on Tuesday with no return address, just her name written in handwriting that wasn't his but felt deliberate, careful. Inside was a small wooden box containing a silver chain she'd never seen before, and tucked beneath it, a note that simply read, "Soon." Her hands trembled as she held it. This artifact from nowhere, this promise wrapped in mystery that made her heart race and her mind spiral. She wore the chain immediately, feeling its weight against her collarbone like a secret she was carrying for someone else. That night, she dreamed of the sound of his voice, calling her name. So vivid, she woke up searching the empty rooms, convinced for a moment that duty had finally released him back to her. The days that followed were thick with waiting. Though she didn't know what she was waiting for, her body understood before her mind did. She'd catch herself staring out the window at nothing, watching cars pass, wondering if one would stop. The neighbors probably thought she was losing it, the way she'd freeze mid-conversation, distracted by sounds only she could hear. Flashbacks ambushed her constantly. Now his face the morning of deployment, the way he'd held her too tight and too long at the gate, how he'd whispered, "I'll come back," like a prayer against her hair, while the flag on the table behind them stood witness. She'd started setting the table for two again, without realizing it, as if her hands were preparing for something her conscious mind refused to hope for, because hope in military families is a dangerous thing. It's the space between homecoming and heartbreak, and sometimes the distance between those two is just one knock at the door. Thursday morning arrived wearing the mask of every other Thursday gray sky, the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet, the same route to the flower shop she'd been taking for years. She needed lilies for the kitchen table, something to break up the monotony of walls that had started closing in, something alive to remind her that beauty still existed even when sacrifice demanded everything. The uniforms folded on the chair had been staring at her all morning, and she'd finally covered it with a blanket, unable to bear its silent accusation that she was moving through life instead of living it. Her keys jangled as she locked the door, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she turned back twice to look at the house, as if memorizing it, as if something told her she'd returned to a different world. The streets moved around her with their usual rhythm, people buying coffee, kids being herded into minivans, the mailman making his rounds, but she felt separate from it all, like she was walking through a movie where everyone else knew their lines and she'd forgotten hers. Inside the flower shop, she stood too long in front of the lilies, her mind elsewhere, thinking about how deployment had taught her that time doesn't heal absence, it just teaches you how to carry it better. Mrs. Chun, who owned the shop, asked if everything was all right, and she lied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, because how do you explain that you've become a woman made of waiting? She bought the flowers, white ones, because they reminded her of the mission briefing room where she'd last kissed him, where honor and duty had stolen him from her arms. Walking back, she took the long way past the park, past the bench where they'd sat the night before he got his orders, where he'd promised her homecoming even though they both knew some promises live in the space between hope and reality. The wind picked up, carrying something she almost recognized. Was it his cologne? Impossible. Her heart started hammering for no reason she could name, that animal instinct that knows before the brain catches up. Then she felt it. A presence behind her, footsteps that matched her pace, a shadow that stretched longer than it should have in the mid-morning light. She slowed down, her breath catching, every nerve in her body suddenly awake, and screaming that the ordinary day had just cracked open. His boots by the door flashed in her mind, empty boots waiting to be filled, and then, gentle as a prayer, firm as a promise, a hand touched her shoulder. The world didn't stop. That's the strange part. Cars kept driving. Birds kept singing. Someone's phone kept ringing in the distance. But for her, time folded in on itself, and she existed in a pocket universe where only that touch mattered. Her body knew before her mind did, recognized the weight of that hand, the specific pressure of fingers that had memorized the landscape of her shoulder years ago. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, suspended in the terrifying space between what she desperately wanted to be true and what deployment had taught her never to assume. The grocery bag slipped from her other hand, lilies spilling onto the pavement in slow motion, white petals scattering like surrender flags, and still she couldn't turn around, because what if she was wrong? What if longing had finally broken her mind completely? "Turn around," his voice said, and it wasn't the voice from her memories. It was rougher, worn down by sand and distance and things he'd never tell her, but it was his, unmistakably, impossibly his. She turned in fractions, her neck rotating like she was defusing a bomb, terrified that sudden movement would shatter whatever miracle was happening behind her. First, she saw the boots. His actual boots, not the ones by the door, but combat boots still dusty from travel. Then the uniform, different from the one folded on the chair, this one creased and real and here. Her eyes climbed higher, past the ribbons and the name tape, until finally she saw his face. And that's when the dam broke. When tears came so hard they bent her forward. When sound escaped her throat that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite laughing, but was every emotion she'd been rationing for 8 months pouring out all at once. He caught her before she fell, arms wrapping around her like they'd never let go again, and she grabbed fistfuls of his uniform, pulling him closer, closer, trying to merge their bodies back into the single unit they'd been before orders and mission and duty had cleaved them apart. No words. They'd said everything in letters, in prayers, in the silent screaming of absence. This moment belonged to the body, to touch, to the confirmation that he was solid and warm and breathing against her hair. She felt his chest heaving, realized he was crying too, felt his tears dropping onto her neck, and understood that homecoming wasn't about parades or flags on tables or triumphant returns. It was this. Two people trying to remember how their pieces fit together after sacrifice had tried to convince them they were meant to be broken. The flag, the honor, the deployment, all of it dissolved into this singular truth. Duty and love had warred for months, and in this embrace, love was finally winning. They walked home in silence, because words would have been an insult to what their bodies had just said, hand in hand like teenagers who'd just discovered what it meant to be chosen by another human being. The world looked different now. The same streets, same houses, same gray sky threatening rain, but she was seeing it through eyes that had remembered how to hope, how to believe that deployment doesn't always end in folded flags and solemn ceremonies. He squeezed her hand 3 times, their old code for "I love you," and she squeezed back 4 times, their code for "I love you more." And it was such a small thing, such an ordinary gesture. But it meant everything, because it meant the language they'd built together had survived the distance. His boots by the door would have company now, would no longer stand as monuments to absence, but as proof that homecoming was real, that honor and sacrifice sometimes gave back what they'd taken. Inside the house, he stopped in the doorway and just looked at the coffee maker with 2 cups, at the uniform folded on the chair now uncovered, at the flag on the table in its triangular case, at the life she'd been living in his absence. She watched him take it in, saw his jaw tighten with emotion he was trying to control, saw him understand without her saying a word what duty had cost her, What mission had demanded she pay while he was gone? He walked to the kitchen table where her unsent letters were stacked, picked up the top one, started to read, and she let him because there were no secrets left between them. Nothing deployment hadn't already stripped away. "You don't have to send these anymore," he whispered, his voice breaking on the last word, and she nodded, knowing that some chapters close not with fanfare, but with quiet relief, with the understanding that waiting is its own kind of war, and she'd just been granted an honorable discharge. That evening, they sat on the couch, pressed together like they were afraid separation might be contagious, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, listening to the steady proof of his heartbeat. The TV stayed off. The phone stayed silent. The world outside could burn for all they cared. This moment was theirs. This homecoming they'd earned through months of longing and letters and mornings, making coffee for ghosts. Rain finally started falling, tapping against windows like applause, and she thought about all the military families still waiting, still setting tables for two, still watching news tickers and calculating time zones and praying that duty would eventually release its grip. She held him tighter, grateful and guilty, all at once, knowing that their reunion was someone else's ongoing sacrifice, that for every soldier who makes it home, others are still overseas, still choosing mission over comfort, still believing that honor means something worth the cost. The uniform folded on the chair could be washed now. His boots by the door would get muddy again, and the flag on the table would remain a reminder not of loss, but of the love that survives, even when deployment tries its hardest to break it. "So here's what I need you to do right now. Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient, not when you feel ready right now. Look around at the people in your life who matter. The ones you take for granted because they're always there, until one day they're not. The ones whose boots sit by your door, whose uniform hangs in your closet, whose absence you practice living with every single day. What are you waiting for? What deployment of your own making work, pride, fear, routine, is keeping you from touching their shoulder, from saying what needs to be said, from making coffee for two while you still can? Because here's the truth, nobody wants to hear. Homecoming isn't guaranteed. Mission doesn't always end in reunion. Duty and love don't always find their way back to each other. That flag on the table, it represents real sacrifice, real families who set two places and only one gets filled. So while you still have the chance, while the people you love are still within reach, what are you going to do differently? Are you going to keep living like deployment is something that only happens to other people? Or are you going to honor the gift of presence by actually being present? I want you to do something for me. Leave a comment right now telling me, who's the person you've been taking for granted? Who's the soldier in your life, literal or metaphorical, that deserves to know they matter before it's too late? And listen, if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that love is worth the wait and honor is worth the cost, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we're going to keep sharing these stories. These reminders that sacrifice is real and homecoming is precious, and every single day we get to walk hand in hand with the people we love is a day we didn't earn but should never, ever waste. The uniform folded on the chair won't wait forever. The boots by the door won't always be there to come home to. So what are you going to do about it today? Right now, this moment. Don't just watch these stories. Live them. Make them yours. And never, ever forget that the greatest mission you'll ever have is loving the people who chose to stay, to wait, to believe that you're worth coming home to.